So I'm reading this highly sensational article on
What article is
Inc.com.
not highly sensational these days?
It says consulting disruption is finally here. AI is redefining client value. Consulting firms that fail to reinvent their operations, services, and business models will be left behind. Says the General Services Administration, the GSA, recently asked its consulting firm suppliers to reduce spending. The response in a letter to the top 10 consulting companies, the GSA commissioner said their proposed cost savings were wholly insufficient to the point of being insulting. The government cash cow is battening down the hatches. On the corporate side, EY recently scaled back its cadre of senior consultants in the UK, citing decreased client demand. I'm sure that's happening far more than EY in the UK. So there's this take, and despite my tone, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with it, that, and I'm reading the headlines here, the traditional model is officially broken, consulting firms must reinvent themselves, digitize delivery, deliver AI-enhanced strategy, sell AI-powered solutions, disrupt or be disrupted is the final headline. Oh, I love that one. Disrupt or be disrupted. It's so scary. Should we be scared, Carrie? Should we run for the hills? Either become robots or run for the hills? Those are the options here?
Well, AI is going to take over and do everything, so it doesn't matter. We don't have to run anywhere. We just get to,
The robots will take us to the hills.
Yeah, we just get to sit back and eat bonbons and,
There you go.
and never work again.
There you go.
Should we be scared? Such a yes/no question, and I don't think it's a yes/no answer. To me, I think what we should be is aware, right? We should be paying attention, but I worry at times, all the time these days, right, that we get these panic-stricken headlines and react far too quickly. And I think what I mean by that is I see people doing two different things, right? When we talk about consultants specifically, and we're talking about AI specifically, right? One path is the panic, which is, oh my gosh, AI is coming to take over everything I do. I'm going to become irrelevant and the world is ending. The other path is I refuse to look at it. There's no way that AI can do anything that I do, and I will continue to forge on exactly as I have been and just ignore that anything's changing in the world. And it fascinates me how often one of those two paths is the one that people choose, right? As opposed to answer your question, should we be scared? To me, the question is more, or the answer is more that we should be paying attention and yes, making adjustments, but not necessarily wholesale throwing our businesses out the window because we think that we're going to be replaced by a robot.
Yeah. Yeah. Pay attention, I think is good advice. I will admit for the first, I would say, what is it now? We're mid 2025. For most of 2024, I didn't really take it all that seriously. I read the headlines. I observed all the noise around it. And not that I discounted the impact AI would have, but I didn't get to the point where I was taking action on it in any meaningful way or thinking about the business impact in any meaningful way. I would say that as I have become more of an adopter of AI in my own workflows and in our company, the way that we use it, and the way that I've seen it, I wouldn't use the word transform our operations, but the way I've seen it improve our operations and make things more efficient, and the way I've seen the use cases show up just for us in very simple terms, frankly, we're not power users of AI by any means. I think we're certainly adopters, but not in any kind of advanced, sophisticated way. To me, light bulbs are going off now a little bit in terms of just how broad the impact is going to be. And then I do think that we're seeing some evidence of that in the market, right? In terms of, to me, the biggest impact right away has been and will continue to be that lower value consulting services are going away. And when I say lower value consulting services, the stuff that, where a client used to say, well, my team's too busy to handle this. I need an extra pair of hands to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now your team's not so busy anymore because your team has found, hopefully, they're finding ways to become more efficient and productive by leveraging AI. In fact, your team might have shrank already because you've been able to find ways to make them more efficient by leveraging AI. So I think gone are the days where you hand a project off to a consultant because they're an extra pair of hands and it's fairly simple work. The article mentions as an example, no one's going to pay for a SWOT analysis anymore, right? And that kind of seems obvious now, right? And yet there was a point at which the big consulting firms charge a lot of money for something like a SWOT analysis, perhaps a little bit more sophisticated with more models, but people charge money for these things in ways that they're just not going to be able to anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, what that means is that although everything's changing, nothing has changed, right? Like those kinds of engagements were never really the kind of engagement that you were bringing forth kind of all of your skills and all of your capabilities and, really doing your best work. Often those kinds of engagements were just, money makers, an opportunity to get an in with a company. But most people want to do the more complex things, right? That's why you become a consultant. You want to do the thing that's interesting, exciting, and makes you think and gives you the opportunity to really help whatever business you're working with. And so, I think just recognizing that the more complex engagements are the ones that always had the highest value, right? They were always the ones that would maybe be more challenging to sell in some ways, right? Because they cost more and they take more of a commitment. But it was always true that as the extra pair of hands, you could easily be replaced, whether it was by a computer or by another human being. Nothing has changed considerably in that regard.
Except that now it's much easier to replace than it was before, where swapping
Sure.
you out for another human would have been harder. Now it's a lot easier. I think what's happening is the lower end consulting gigs, and there's a lot of people out there who I think just don't want to go out and get a job, and are perfectly satisfied doing the same work they would do in a job for a handful of clients, and making a reasonable amount of money doing relatively low value work. I do think that those people are going to struggle. Either they're going to get pushed out of the consulting market back into the job market, which is no cakewalk either right now for the same reasons, right? Like a lot of what's affecting the consulting market is well, I'd say all of it, frankly, is also affecting the job market. So this is not unique to consulting by any means. I think what's happening is that the bar for value creation has gone up for consultants. And I would argue potentially slightly more than for staff, because there's a higher bar to hire a consultant. Hiring staff, I'm used to having staff. I have a certain head count. If somebody leaves, I'm going to replace them. Yes, there are layoffs, don't get me wrong, but it's part of doing business is you have staff, right? You have an org chart to fill out, and that's just how business is done. Hiring a consultant is typically a disruptive exercise. It's a new person, they're coming in, and I'm not referring here to contractors that go out and bill 40 hours a week to a client. You're effectively staff, you're an employee. I'm not referring to you, you're not a consultant. I'm referring to actual advisory based consultants who have multiple clients and sell their expertise and their insights. It's very disruptive. And I think now what's happening is clients are going to start or have started second guessing and questioning, is this disruption worthwhile? Is the value that's going to be created potentially by this consultant worth the disruption of bringing them in? Or are we better off, leveraging one of these new fancy tools that we've gained to deliver similar impact?
Yeah, and I think when we think about how to react to it, what we're not saying is just because you're in one of those higher value markets, right? Just because your offer is a higher value offer, if we use that as our shorthand, that nothing has to change, right? Because still the expectation about how you do business, the expectation about, what people are paying for, those things are still shifting under our feet. And so I think what we're really talking about is not seeing AI as an opponent, right? Or competition, but really seeing it as a tool and understanding and really thinking through, okay, where can this technology help me? not in a way that replaces the, complexities of human thought and interaction and relationship building and all of those things. I mean, maybe we'll get there one day, but it's not where we are today. Um, and so, considering this as a tool, just like any other tool, right? If we look back over time, to me, the only difference now is that things are changing so much more quickly, right? AI is coming into its own so quickly. Like, if you did something last week and you use the same prompt this week, things are, night and day. They have changed. But new technology has come along all along, right? Like, business has changed significantly because of new technologies historically. It's just that now it's happening so much faster. And so, what you need to do is just get yourself in the headspace of being able to adapt more quickly, but adapt in a way that you're using the technology in a way that suits and supports and benefits what it is that you're trying to do.
And I think there's a fear there, if we're being honest, right? I think there's a fear there that if I, okay, fine, Carrie, let me go down the road and try to adopt AI. And maybe I'm not going to completely rebuild my business, but let me try to incorporate AI into my workflows, my operations, whatever. I think there's a genuine fear there around, okay, but what if, what if AI does all of it, and
Yeah.
I find a way to structure it in a way that it does it just as well as I do, or better than I do, or almost as good as me. I think there's this kind of like existential crisis people are bumping up against. Whereas
Mhm.
if I go down that path, what does that mean for me? And I think your point about seeing it as as an ally, as an asset, not a threat, is really important, because if you go into it with this kind of threat mindset, AI is taking our jobs and it's going to do all of our work for us, and I don't think there's really much utility in forecasting out into the future very much. I mean, nobody really knows. It is definitely a radical transformational change in the way that we do work. But what that means in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, your guess is as good as mine. I would ground yourself in reality. And I think the attitude that you mentioned, Carrie, is really important. It's an asset. It's positive. It's going to improve the way that you deliver services to your clients. And so find ways to make those improvements and kind of put your ego aside for a moment. I think what you'll find is that it likely won't replace you. It'll make you better. And I think that's
Mhm.
the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of this fear is grounded in in really thinking about what I do today, right? What I do and how I do it today, and not opening up your mind to what could be different if you had this kind of powerhouse, you know, quote unquote, on your team, right? What bigger problems, what more complex solutions could you solve and offer with this, additional tool in your hands? And I think if you can start to think about it that way and not limit yourself, and this is difficult, right? You spend a long time, or, considerable time getting to a place where you can define, and we tell people this, right? Get to a place where you can clearly define your offer, where you're very clear about what it is that you do. And you really want to inhabit that space, right? And have your feet kind of firmly grounded when it comes to that, what we call, results mechanism. But being able to say, okay, that's the thing I do today. And also, right, how could that evolve? And leaving enough space in your thinking so that you can see opportunities. And that's truly what comes out of all change, right? Is some kind of opportunity. Fear first and then opportunity. And the question is just whether or not you can capitalize on the opportunity side of that equation.
And hopefully that helps, right? Because we're not saying that the way that you did things in the past is going to work forever and that you'll be fine. Probably won't be. If you stick kind of dogmatically and stubbornly to the old way of doing things, you're probably not going to be fine. I think we're also not saying that you're doomed, because AI is going to do everything and replace everything that you could possibly do. And the reason why you're likely not doomed is because, yes, your clients will adopt AI, will integrate it into their operations, will rely on it more, will replace, staff and lower value consultants and contractors with AI, will become more efficient, and will second guess bringing in a consultant that is disruptive. However, in doing so, their needs will change. once they've integrated, as if that's going to be a destination, right? Like as they integrate, there's work to be done, there's challenges, there's new problems. And I think what you're going to see is that the landscape of your client's needs is going to shift and evolve. And that's the big opportunity you're speaking to, Carrie, is if you can stay plugged into that changing of the landscape. We say this all the time on this podcast, where there's change, there's opportunity. You stand to do very well in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another area where, philosophically it's not changing, right? You always needed to pay attention. You always needed to talk to clients. You always needed to understand what their new and evolving needs were. The challenge now is you can see a reason for those new and evolving needs, and you don't quite understand it, and that feels scary. But in the end, the reality is still the reality, which is you have to stay connected and stay in touch.
And the pace, to your point, is what's
Yeah.
really feels different now. Is in the past, perhaps if you had a stable roster of clients and things were relatively status quo, you could afford to rest on your laurels a little bit. I think with the pace of change that we're seeing right now with AI and how it's transforming business operations at large, not just consulting, resting on your laurels is a bit of a recipe for disaster.